The Legend of Zelda series has featured many villains over the years. Though none have appeared as often as Ganon, several one-hit wonders have left their own mark on the series, and are worth talking about in their own right. Over the next couple of videos, I'll be ranking every single major antagonist from my least favorite to my favorite. Before we jump right into it, there are a few things to note. First, please be aware that this video reflects only my personal opinions. This is not intended to be an objective analysis, but simply a conversation based on my own thoughts and experiences. Next, I'll be lumping every version of Ganon and Ganondorf together, because otherwise we'd be here all day. Third, this video is purely about character, and will not take boss battles into account. Fourth, while I do take spin-off appearances into account, this list only features villains who originate in mainline games. Finally, all games are subject to heavy spoilers. With that out of the way, let's begin. In last place is Lady Maud, the antagonist of Triforce Heroes. With the plot of this game being as absurd as it is, it's no surprise that its villain has an equally bizarre story. As part of a tribe who fashions magical clothing items, a concept that could be really cool if done well, she becomes jealous of the fashionable Princess Styla and curses her with an ugly, form-fitting jumpsuit that can't be removed. Yes, this is the premise of a canon mainline Zelda game. Lady Maud's motive is shallow, and her evil scheme has no real stakes. In the end, a couple encounters with the three Links are enough to make her give up, and she surrenders quietly, never to be heard from again. Lady Maud could be an interesting villain for a Saturday morning cartoon, but in a high fantasy action adventure series, she just feels shallow and out of place. One of the many antagonists seen throughout the two Oracle games, Onox is in my opinion the weakest. While he does manage to plunge Holodrum into chaos and delay Link long enough for the Flame of Destruction to be lit, he doesn't have much personality and is barely seen throughout the game. His motive for submitting to Twin Rova is vague at best, with one throwaway line about being summoned from the Dark Realm, and we don't really get a sense of what he's hoping to accomplish through his deeds. His official artwork resembles an Iron Knuckle from Ocarina of Time, which is fitting since he's one step away from just being a generic enemy. At the end of the day, he feels more like a plot device than an actual character. Featured in Phantom Hourglass, Bellum is an ancient sea serpent whose only goal is to drain people's life force. This is actually a pretty good premise for a sea monster, and Bellum had a lot of potential. On top of being powerful enough to defeat the Ocean King, OoS, his backstory shows that he's cunning as well. He invented the story of a ghost ship filled with treasure to lure in prospective adventurers and drain their life force, which is honestly terrifying. He's also capable of possessing people, which we see at the end of the game. The problem is that what we actually see of him in-game reflects very little of this. He doesn't utter a single line of dialogue, appears only briefly, and ultimately feels like just another giant eyeball boss, as if the series hasn't had enough of those already. He's a really cool idea for a monster, but falls short as a main antagonist. Hailing from Spirit Tracks, Malladus is essentially Ganon's equivalent in New Hyrule. He waged a fierce war in the land until his imprisonment 100 years before the events of the game, and has since been separated from his body. What makes him a weak villain is how passive he is. Since he doesn't have a body of his own, his goal is to possess Zelda's, since it's so full of life force. However, everything that happens throughout the game is really thanks to Chancellor Cole, his underling. Malladus is more or less just along for the ride, no pun intended, and only acts of his own free will at the very end of the game when he possesses Cole's body. He's ultimately nothing but a power-hungry demon with little agency in the plot of his own game. The villains of Link's Awakening are abstract compared to the rest. It's not entirely clear where they come from, or why they choose to torment the Windfish specifically. We don't even know what their true form looks like, since they can take on many. The mysteries behind the nightmares make them ominous, and they're a unique concept. They also present Link with an interesting moral dilemma, since defeating them means destroying the island. That's really all that can be said about them, though. The only goal they express is a generic desire to rule the world, and much like Bellum, they feel more like entities than actual characters. In the end, the problem they create stands out more than they themselves do. As the impish Chancellor of Hyrule, Cole has more personality than any of the previously mentioned villains. He's a politician who pretends to act in the kingdom's best interest, while secretly planning to revive the Demon King, and it's thanks to his scheming that the events of the game unfold. He's even the one who separates Zelda's spirit from her body, immediately establishing him as a threat. Much like bad politicians in real life, Cole is prone to throwing a fit when he doesn't get what he wants, and often displays his impatience with the heroes. The only thing holding him back is that there's really no depth to his character. We never learn why he wants Malladus to return, or what he hopes to gain by it, making him come off as generic despite his strong personality. Like the nightmares from Link's Awakening, Majora is more of an enigmatic entity than an actual character. We know that a being named Majora most likely existed, because otherwise names like Majora's Mask or Majora's Wrath wouldn't make sense, but very little is known about this being. The mask itself was used by an ancient tribe, who performed hexing rituals until the mask's power became so fearsome it had to be sealed away. But it's unknown where or how they got the mask. Was Majora a person whose soul got put into the mask, like the transformation masks we use in the game? Was it named after the tribe that used it? These questions may never be answered, but based on the mask's evil power and the grotesque forms it takes in the final fight, we can infer that Majora was a force to be reckoned with. Its terrifying power and the countless mysteries surrounding it make Majora an unforgettable villain. One of the villains of A Link Between Worlds, Yuga's defining characteristic is his obsession with beauty. His entire scheme is motivated by a desire to attain godhood and remake the world in his image of perfection, a quirky but fresh motivation for a Zelda villain. His lines are full of personality, and he shamelessly flames characters who don't meet his standards, including poor Link. His ability to turn people into paintings makes him a genuine threat, and he's sadistic enough to let people rot away as carvings on a wall, a fate that Link would have suffered if not for Ravio's bracelet. Later, he flips the script on Ganon, using him as a puppet for his goals when usually it's the other way around. Yuga is also cunning enough to go behind Hilda's back without her knowledge, turning against her at the last moment. Yuga is a fun, quirky, fresh villain, but at the end of the day he's also shallow. Beyond his desire to rule the world and his strange obsession, there's not much to him. The boss of the Yiga clan, Kohga, first appeared in Breath of the Wild. Initially, I was disappointed in the way his character was handled. The Yiga were a menacing new tribe, but their leader was treated as a joke. Though his fight shows that he has mastery over secret techniques, his dialogue is silly and gives him a cartoonish personality. One quick battle later, he's at the bottom of a pit, never to be seen again. Or at least in this timeline. Whether or not Age of Calamity is canon, it deserves to be taken into consideration here. After all, it features the same cast of characters, just in a slightly different scenario. Master Kohga gets much more screen time here, and his humorous personality grew on me before all was said and done. Beneath this goofy persona, however, is some genuine menace. Kohga genuinely attempts to kill the heroes, and even his fellow villain Astor at one point. Despite his villainy, he genuinely cares about his underlings. When Astor begins harvesting their souls to revive the Blight Ganons, Kohga sees what the calamity is really about and joins forces with Zelda, aiming to avenge his fallen tribesmen. Kohga ends up being a multi-layered villain, and if he got more depth in his mainline game instead of a spin-off, he'd probably be even higher on my list. That brings us to the end of part 1. If you made it this far, I hope to see you again in part 2, which should be up a week or two from now. In the meantime, I'd really appreciate if you checked out my Let's Play channel, FP Plays, where I'm currently playing through Minish Cap. The link will be in the description. This is FP Productions, and I'll see you next time.